Who decides whether you exist or not? In the history of the United States of America, there was a moment when this existential question was decided not in courtrooms, not in the offices of the White House, and not even on the Wall Street Stock Exchange. It was decided in one specific room, inside a house that, from the outside, seemed almost modest compared to the palaces that had sprung up around it. This is a story not just about brick and marble. This is a story about a woman who, with a single signature on an invitation card, could elevate a person to the pinnacle of the social pyramid or destroy their reputation forever. Welcome to Newport, Rhode Island, a place where the air is imbued with the salt of the Atlantic and the scent of old money. We stand before the gates of Beechwood Mansion. If you look at the neighboring buildings, at the gigantic marble monuments like the Breakers or Marble House, Beechwood might seem surprisingly restrained to you. A cream facade, classical lines, Italian style. No screaming gargoyles, no 3-story-high golden gates. But do not let this outward modesty deceive you. In 1881, when this house passed into the hands of new owners, it became the most unassailable bastion in the Western Hemisphere. It was a fortress, and the commandant of this fortress was a woman whose name was spoken in whispers, with a mixture of reverence and dread. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor. While other wealthy individuals built houses to trumpet their wealth, Mrs. Astor, as she was called, simply Mrs. Astor, without a first name, as if she were the only one in the world, used Beechwood to maintain silence. She did not need proof of her status. She herself was the proof. But why did this woman, possessing a fortune that, if converted to modern money, would amount to billions, feel a constant threat? Why did she transform her summer home into the most intricate filter through which only the chosen few could pass? Inside this house is a ballroom, and in this hall there is one architectural feature that changed the social history of America. This hall accommodated exactly 400 people, not 401, not 450. Exactly 400. If you were the 401st, you remained outside, literally and figuratively. Today, we will pass through these doors. We will see mirrors that reflected not just faces, but the fear of losing one's place in life. We will touch the railings down which a man descended, whose life would tragically end in the icy waters of the Atlantic aboard the Titanic 30 years later. We will see how Beechwood became the stage for the last great battle of the old aristocracy against the encroaching world of industrial sharks. It seemed impossible that this world would collapse. It seemed that Beechwood's parquet floors would forever feel the glide of the chosen one's silk slippers. But history, as we know, loves irony. What was created as a symbol of eternity and exclusivity became a monument to human pride and the inevitability of change. In the next 20 minutes, we will not merely examine the interiors. We will dissect the anatomy of power. We will learn how one house became the center of the universe for the Gilded Age elite, and what a terrible price its inhabitants had to pay for the right to sit on the throne. Why did Caroline Astor, a woman with an icy gaze and a diamond corsage, choose this particular cliff overlooking the ocean? What did she see, looking into the endless blue of the water, that others did not? And how did this house, intended to protect her family from the vulgarity of the New World, ultimately become a witness to the collapse of everything she believed in? To understand this, we need to go back. Not to the moment of the house's purchase, but much earlier. We need to understand what material this woman's soul was woven from. Because Beechwood is not just a building, it is the physical embodiment of her mind, her fears, and her absolute, unquestionable will. The story begins not with the foundation, but with blood. To truly understand the phenomenon of Beechwood and the Cold War that was waged within its walls, one must rewind time and look into the eyes of the woman who chose it. Caroline Webster Schermerhorn was born on September 22, 1830, into a family that meant more to New York than a royal dynasty. Note the surname, Schermerhorn. These were the so-called Knickerbockers, descendants of the first Dutch settlers. They owned land in Manhattan when sheep still grazed there, and skyscrapers did not yet rise. For Caroline, the world was divided into two unequal parts: those whose ancestors arrived before the War of Independence, and everyone else. She grew up with the conviction that social status is not something that can be bought. It is something one is born with, like eye color or the shape of one's nose. In 1853, an event occurred that laid the foundation for our story. Caroline married William Backhouse Astor Jr. This was not a marriage of passionate love. It was a merger of corporations. The Astors possessed colossal wealth, earned from furs and real estate. But in the eyes of the old Dutch families, they still remained slightly insufficiently refined. The Schermerhorns, however, had an impeccable reputation, but less cash. This union created an absolute monster of influence. Caroline received an unlimited resource for the realization of her ambitions. But against whom was she going to wage war? The world around was rapidly changing. After the end of the Civil War in 1865, America was experiencing an industrial boom. From nowhere, people with surnames Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Carnegie appeared. They built railroads, extracted steel, and pumped oil. Their fortunes grew at a frightening speed, eclipsing the incomes of the old aristocracy. For Caroline, these people were barbarians storming the gates of Rome. They ate too quickly, spoke too loudly, and wore too many diamonds. Caroline saw in this not just bad taste, but an existential threat. She sincerely believed that she was the guardian of civilization. If money were allowed to determine status, she reasoned, society would plunge into a chaos of vulgarity. It was then that a strategy was born in her, which was as brilliant as it was cruel. She understood that she cannot prevent the nouveau riche from earning money. She cannot forbid them from building palaces, but she can deprive them of the main thing, recognition. She can make their wealth socially useless. What is the point of having $10 million if the doors of the only house that matters are closed before your nose? Caroline decided to become America's chief gatekeeper. She transformed her life and her homes into impregnable bastions of etiquette. It was a game of survival, where the weapons were not rapiers, but calling cards and dinner invitations. She was a complex figure. On one hand, an arrogant tyrant, refusing to acknowledge reality. On the other, a woman trying to preserve a world understandable to her, which was crumbling under the onslaught of progress. She was not just a snob, she was an ideologue of the old order. And for the realization of her plan, she needed a staging ground. She needed a place where she could physically separate the wheat from the chaff. That place was to be Newport, and it was precisely here, on the ocean shore, that she began to build her defense, relying on a person who would help her transform social life into an exact science. To realize her grand plan, Caroline needed a strategist. She lacked flexibility. She was too monumental, like a statue. She needed a man who knew every pedigree and every dirty secret of New York. This man was Samuel Ward McAllister, a Southern gentleman who did not possess vast wealth, but had impeccable taste and a maniacal passion for detail. Their alliance became a turning point in the history of the American elite. If Caroline was the queen, McAllister became her chancellor. Together, they decided to transform the abstract concept of society into an exclusive club with strict regulations. In 1881, this alliance took physical form. Caroline acquired Beechwood Mansion from the heirs of Daniel Parish. The choice was deeply symbolic. While the Vanderbilts bought land to erect marble mausoleums that screamed of wealth, Astor bought a house with history, built as early as '51. She did not need the glitter of novelty. She needed the patina of time. But the old house required adaptation to new imperial ambitions. She hired architect Richard Morris Hunt, a man who shaped the face of America at that time, and entrusted him with a task that seemed simple only at first glance. She did not just need a renovation, she needed a stage for judgment. Hunt spent $2 million on the reconstruction, which, in today's currency, amounts to tens of millions. The main change was the addition of a new wing with a ballroom. And here, McAllister's cold calculation and Astors' iron will merged into one. They mathematically calculated that the hall should comfortably accommodate exactly 400 people. No more. This number, 400, became magical and fateful simultaneously. McAllister publicly declared, "There are only about 400 people in New York who are truly in society." It was a brilliant marketing decision. By limiting the physical space of the ballroom at Beechwood, they created an artificial scarcity of dignity. Now, every millionaire in the country woke up with one thought: not to be the 401st. Beechwood ceased to be merely a summer residence. It became a filter, separating the chosen from the commoners, and it was here that old traditions met with a new, ruthless social mechanism. When a guest crossed the threshold of Beechwood, they instantly understood the difference between a merely wealthy house and the residence of a monarch. The outward restraint of the facade gave way to the dazzling splendor of the interiors, inspired by French Versailles. Architect Richard Morris Hunt designed the enfilade of rooms so that each subsequent space intensified the visitor's awe. The walls were paneled in white with heavy gold stucco, and enormous mirrors placed opposite each other created a frightening illusion of an infinite corridor. In this mirrored labyrinth, reflections of diamond tiaras multiplied endlessly, creating the effect of a crowd of thousands, even if the room was empty. The air here always smelled of a mixture of fresh hothouse roses, brought in that morning, and expensive beeswax, with which servants polished the floors to a dangerously icy state. The heart and lungs of this organism was that very ballroom. It was a space of perfect geometry, calculated with surgical precision. Enormous crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, like frozen ice waterfalls, bathing the rare wood parquet in merciless electric light. There were no dark corners here where one could hide from the hostess's scrutinizing gaze. Everything was in plain sight. Dozens of servants in blue livery, the Astor family's signature color, moved absolutely silently, like ghosts, serving champagne and disappearing into the walls. This invisible army ensured a flawless rhythm of life where not a single napkin could lie crooked. But the most powerful psychological tool was the reception area. Caroline Astor never met guests at the door. She waited for them deep inside the house, standing beneath a colossal portrait of herself, painted by the famous artist Carolus Duran. This created the effect of an overwhelming double presence. The living queen and her immortal majestic image looked upon the entrant simultaneously. The guest had to walk through the entire hall, feeling the gaze of hundreds of competing eyes, to approach her. Louis XIV-style furniture, heavy wine-colored velvet drapes, marble fireplaces where a fire burned even in summer. Every detail screamed of legitimacy and eternity. Beechwood was designed not for comfort, but as a temple of personality cult, where every chair and every vase served one purpose: to make you feel your insignificance before the grandeur of Mrs. Astor. Behind the flawless facade of Beechwood, where every gesture was meticulously choreographed, lay a deafening personal emptiness. William Backhouse Astor Jr., the man whose money paid for this spectacle, hated it with every fiber of his being. He openly called life at Beechwood unbearable and escaped to his enormous yacht, Ambassadress, preferring the salty wind and the company of women of dubious reputation to his wife's stifling etiquette. Caroline remained alone on her throne. Herein lies the tragic ambivalence of her figure. She was an all-powerful queen of society, but an absolute loner in her own marriage. We must ask ourselves, was she a heroine, defending culture from vulgarity, or a tyrant, sacrificing the happiness of her loved ones for an abstract idea of elitism? The catalyst for the catastrophe was a woman Caroline had refused to acknowledge for years, Alva Vanderbilt. It was a war of two worlds, and Alva struck at the most vulnerable spot, a mother's heart. In 1883, Caroline's daughter, young Carrie, dreamed of attending the Grand Vanderbilt Costume Ball. She prepared her costume, rehearsed the quadrille. But on the day invitations were sent out, the envelope for the Astors did not arrive. Alva delivered a brilliant tactical blow, stating, "I cannot invite Miss Astor, for Mrs. Astor has never called on me nor left her card." It was an ultimatum. Caroline faced an impossible choice: preserve her pride and principles, but break her beloved daughter's heart and make her an outcast among the youth, or publicly humiliate herself before the upstart. The moment Caroline Astor's black carriage drove through the gates of the Vanderbilt home to leave a tiny piece of cardboard marked the beginning of the end of an old era. It was an act of maternal love, but simultaneously an act of capitulation. The Queen blinked. For the first time, human feeling triumphed over iron regulations, but this weakness fatally fractured the foundation upon which Beechwood stood. The illusion of impregnability dissipated. The gates were open. The visit to the Vanderbilts was just the first crack in the dam. The 20th century burst through Beechwood's doors, sweeping away the conventions Caroline had built for decades. In 1908, the Queen of Society passed away. For the first time in a quarter of a century, absolute, deafening silence reigned in Beechwood's ballroom. The house, which had been an instrument of power, was orphaned. It passed to her son, Colonel John Jacob Astor IV, and this transition marked a radical transformation of the very essence of the Astor legacy. John Jacob was a man of a completely different era. If his mother looked to the past, trying to preserve it, Jack, as his intimates called him, was obsessed with the future. He was an inventor who patented a bicycle brake and a road-paving vibrator. He wrote science fiction novels about life on Saturn and Jupiter. He felt constrained by the suffocating corset of his mother's etiquette. Beechwood ceased to be a fortress of snobbery and became the home of a man seeking personal happiness. At 50, going against all societal rules, he divorced and married 18-year-old Madeline Force. It was a scandal that would have made Caroline turn over in her grave, but Jack didn't care. To escape the gossip, the couple embarked on a long journey to Egypt and Europe. The crisis that forever changed the fate of Beechwood and the entire dynasty did not occur in the ballroom, but in the middle of the North Atlantic. In the spring of 1912, Jack and a pregnant Madeline were returning home to start a new life in a renovated Beechwood. They bought tickets for the most luxurious liner in history, the Titanic. On the night of April 15th, a disaster struck that nullified all plans. According to survivors, John Jacob Astor displayed the very nobility his mother only spoke of. He helped his young wife into lifeboat number 4. He asked an officer if he could accompany her, given her delicate condition. Upon being refused, he did not argue, did not try to buy a place, did not use his name, which opened any door in New York. He simply stepped back, lit a cigarette on deck, and remained to await the end with the ship. The wealthiest passenger on the Titanic, the owner of Beechwood, a man whose fortune was estimated at $87 million, died, crushed by a falling smokestack of the ship. His body was found later. In his pockets were a gold watch and several $1,000s, which were worthless in the icy water. Beechwood awaited a master who never returned. The tragedy transformed this house from a symbol of arrogance into a monument to human fragility. All the gold, all the etiquette, all the lists of 400 names proved powerless in the face of the cold element of death. Ambition gave way to sorrow and grandeur to emptiness. Today, if you walk along the Cliff Walk Promenade in Newport, you will see Beechwood, still standing on that same cliff, buffeted by the same salty Atlantic winds. But the history of this house has completed an amazing, almost mystical circle, which transforms the biography of the Astor family into a universal parable about time, pride, and the true price of legacy. After the death of John Jacob Astor IV on the Titanic, the house became orphaned. His widow Madeleine lived there for a while, but the era that this mansion epitomized sank beneath the waves along with the ocean liner. The 20th century was merciless to old palaces. Many were destroyed, others converted into apartment buildings or museums with cheap souvenirs. Beechwood also went through a period of humiliation, serving as a venue for theatrical performances where actors portrayed those who once decided the fates of the world within its walls. It seemed Caroline Astor's spirit was utterly desecrated. However, in 2010, an event occurred that could be called an irony of history or a restoration of justice. The mansion was put up for sale and acquired for $10.5 million. The buyer was Larry Ellison, co-founder of Oracle Corporation, one of the richest people on the planet, a man who made his fortune in technology, the very industry that ultimately destroyed the old world of aristocracy. Imagine Caroline Astor's face if she had known that her sacred temple was bought by a man whose wealth was created not by land or furs, but by invisible software code. To her, he would have been worse than a Vanderbilt. He would have been an alien. But it was this outsider who accomplished what the heirs of old money lacked the means or the will to do. Ellison invested over $100 million in Beechwood's restoration. He did not tear down walls or turn it into a high-tech villa. On the contrary, he restored every detail with fanatical precision, returning the house to its original grandeur, to house his collection of 18th and 19th century art. The circle closed. The money of the new era saved a monument of the old era. This teaches us the main lesson. The battle between old and new money, to which Caroline dedicated her entire life, is meaningless in the face of eternity. Capital has no scent or age. It only has a function: to create or to destroy. Beechwood survived not because of its creator's snobbery, but because the beauty she tried to monopolize ultimately proved stronger than her prejudices. What does this story teach us today? We look at Beechwood and see a mirror of our own ambitions. Caroline Astor invented a list of 400 people to create an illusion of exclusivity. Today, this list has mutated. We no longer queue for a ballroom in Newport, but we just as desperately strive to get into private chats, get a verification checkmark on social media, or see our name on the Forbes list. The mechanics of human vanity have not changed in a century and a half, only the scenery has changed. We are still just as afraid of being the 401st, superfluous, unnoticed, left outside the door. The story of Beechwood is a reminder that any lists and rankings crumble to dust. The only thing that remains is what we have created and how we departed. In the finale of this saga, a great literary image comes to mind, created just a few years after Jack Astor's death. Jay Gatsby, looking at the green light on the other side of the bay. The Astors were the ones who lit that beacon for all of America. They created a myth of unattainable grandeur. But, as in Fitzgerald's novel, this myth proved fragile. Caroline died in the solitude of her grandeur, Jack perished, showing a humanity he was not taught, and their house now belongs to a man who rewrote the rules of the game. Beechwood stands today as a silent witness that we do not truly own things. We are merely temporary custodians. We rent our place in history, paying with our actions, not our bank accounts. The walls of this mansion have heard the rustle of silk dresses, the clinking of crystal glasses, the cries for help of those drowning in the ocean, and the quiet hum of servers of the new digital age. But if you step out onto the terrace and close your eyes, You will hear only one thing, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. The very same sound that Caroline Astor heard when she first set foot on this shore. The ocean does not care who you are, a queen of society or a stoker on a ship. And in this great indifference of nature lies the only true freedom. The story of the Astors and their home is complete, but the lesson that dignity is more important than title and legacy is more important than wealth will live forever as long as these walls stand.